Recently, I just got NESmaker or NESmaker. It's actually pronounced NESmaker. But anyway, I just got it. I just started working on Nessy The NES Robot. I'm going to be posting some dev posts about it on Twitter. So expect there to be a lot of posts related to the game on Twitter if you want to see constant updates to the game. But then again, there is a Nessy Dev Twitter page, which I should probably use more often. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Oh my god, yes. Finally!
Yes! Let's go!
3 years! 3 fucking years! It's finally done! Oh my god!
Yeah. Let's go!
Oh my god, yeah, honestly, I don't think you should add any more. I'd say it's good as it is, to be honest.
Throughout this time, this game had many ups and downs. It's been through quite a lot, especially a lot of the times where I kind of just gave up on the whole thing. It was one of the most complicated moments of my whole life. But after all this time, do I think it was still worth it? Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Hello everybody, my name is Daniel T, welcome back to Daniel T Gaming, and today I would like to talk about a project I had spent 3 years working on, from 2018 to 2021, and that game is of course what you're seeing on the screen right now, Nessy The NES Robot. This game originally started out as a little passion project between me and a couple friends, and it was all done through an NES creation program called NESmaker. It had just been released around the same time of that year, and during that time they released their platform base, and we were able to use that to help create this game. So yeah, this game is entirely playable on the NES, and because of that it can be playable on anything that can run the NES. That includes emulators, that includes RetroArch, so, and even the physical hardware itself. So it can basically be played on almost anything that can run the NES. When we first started out, we honestly didn't know what we were doing. We were just creating random test sprites, we were just creating random levels, we were just getting into the flow of just creating a bunch of random stuff, and we never really had a solid structure when it comes to the game itself. In fact, it was even during that time that we actually created a little binder dedicated to all the stuff we had documented and created for Nessy The NES Robot, and there's just a lot of random stuff in here, including some course designs and map designs and stuff like that. And it was thanks to this that we found out that we had started development on this game sometime on June 7th, 2018. So that was literally 3 years ago. Jesus Christ. And actually, speaking of that, the first thing that we actually started on was the music. The music was all mainly done by me, and it was in a program I had actually not really known much at the time, but now I kind of know a lot of the ups and downs about it, called FamiTracker. And it was actually during that time that we had created just a bunch of random songs just out of nowhere, just coming up with ideas and just writing random songs for them. Some of the songs that managed to survive that time period were the boss music and the music that plays when you walk into Dusty's room. So those are the oldest songs that are in the soundtrack. We will be releasing it separately in the future on streaming services though, so make sure to go check that out, hopefully sometime in a few weeks or maybe next month, whenever DistroKid finally gets it loaded. The level design was both the most fun part of making that game as well as the most tedious part when it came to making that game. We had a really fun time just creating a bunch of stuff for the levels and just creating little designs for it. But sometimes when you're having to create a game and it needs levels that are structured well for people to have fun with it, that's when things get very complicated. Although the sprite work was also mostly done by me. It was also done by my friend PickPen. He really helped out a lot when it came to that. He does a lot of great sprite design.
But yeah, as for what I did that helped Daniel out was mainly just motivational support, just, you know, just telling him that everything will be alright and stuff. Level design tweaks, like, mainly something that the player might accidentally find in that stuff, like a bug or something. And not only that, but I also worked on a few of the sprites, believe it or not. Starting with, well, obviously Pioka and Dusty. I looked at Daniel's sprite, and all it was like a scaled down sprite of Dusty, and I was like, dude, let me handle this.
I also had a little bit of difficulty when it came to Nessy's eyes, because honestly I really didn't know what to do there, because the actual character has the white eyes and the little pupils in it, and honestly I had a difficult time trying to replicate that on the NESmaker program. But fortunately, one of my NES programmer friends, his name is Cutacross, he managed to find out that the sprite was perfect enough to be able to create another palette and then put the white in Nessy's eyes in there, and the sprite looks absolutely beautiful. Honestly, I'm really happy with how the sprite work turned out in this game. I will admit, the coding was also kind of fun to work on. Obviously, it was done by my friend Cutacross, as well as another one that goes by the name Dale Coop. They were both very helpful when it came to the coding for this game. I really had a difficult time trying to get things properly working, and they managed to figure out most of it. So I have to give huge major kudos to them for their hard work on that. I will admit, getting the proper motivation to continue working on something like this was actually very difficult. But I will say this, things got a lot easier when it came to the Bites Off competition that happened in 2019. I had submitted the demo for the game for it, and the creator of NESmaker, as well as the Bite Off demo, Joe Granato, I hope I pronounced that right, his child got to play some of the games that were from that competition, and the first game that that child ever played was Nessy The NES Robot. So honestly, that really helped push me as well as my friends to continue working on this game. So that really did mean a lot. If you're watching this right now, Joe, thank you for that. That really helped push this game to where it is right now. I will be honest with you, the hardest part of this entire game, this entire process, it wasn't the sprite artwork or the level designing or the bug testing or even getting the game finished. No, the hardest part was actually getting it released, because you worked so hard to get this game complete. You worked so hard to finally get it completed, and you spent so much time on it that you get a connection with it, a connection that you don't really have that often. So, you know, just finally seeing it all grown up and out there in the world right now and just actually, you know, released, it feels weird. It honestly did, and it felt kind of sad too, because, you know, this big chapter of your life is coming to a close. And for some people, you know, it's like freedom. You know, you worked so hard on it and you're getting it done and it's released, but at the same time, you spent so much time on it. You know, like 2 or 3 years, possibly 5+ years on a game, and now it's out there and the journey's over. It's honestly kind of sad, but at the same time, you know, sometimes it's the destination that counts. Yeah, I know a lot of people say it's about the journey, not the destination, but still, when it comes to making a game, the destination is definitely very important. Another big question I had when it came to this game and its release is what's going to happen to Nessy, the character, because he played an important part of this channel and then he goes away and now all of a sudden he's in his own game. So what's going to happen to him? Honestly, I want him to still be a part of this channel because he is a very important character to me. He's my brainchild. So honestly, I really just want to you know, keep having him as a part of this channel, even if he's not really going to be doing much.
I don't exactly, like, remember how Pioka got into this. All I know is that Daniel pretty much just put her in the game with, like, no thought whatsoever at the beginning of development. Like, I don't even, like, recall him, like, asking me, I don't think. Maybe he did? I'm not entirely sure, but whatever the case is, she's in. Although, even with that in mind, I wouldn't start, like, helping Daniel out with the development until, like, the beginning of 2021, so pretty much late in development. You would think having my character be in there, I would give much attention to that, but I guess at the time when Nessy The NES Robot was first announced, I was, like, still focusing on, like, Twitter, because I was on that platform at the time before I left.
And with all of that said, thank you all so much for watching. A huge thank you to all the friends who had worked on this game. Their links will be in the description below. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then be sure to hit the like button. And if you're new, the subscribe button and the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I upload a video. And if you have any other suggestions as to what I should talk about next, and if you have any fan art of the character that you want to submit to me, you can go and submit them all via Twitter, Discord, and in the comment section below. And with all that said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Be sure to go check out Nessy The NES Robot. The itch.io page will be in the description below. I'm also hoping to get a release for it on Steam, so we'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye! Oh, man.